Evening all. Welcome to the Nation of Brian. Uh, Tonight I'm going to kind of work a little backwards from where I originally started. I know I've been doing live streams and live videos and regular videos for a couple months now. And I kind of go through and sometimes gloss over or sometimes explain in detail why I think people to understand the process. And pardon me, because of that, I'm going to get into an explanation of why I think like I do. That doesn't mean that you have to sit through it. You should, but you don't have to. How I got here and how I get to the foundational tenets of what I believe, like in order to understand freedom, you have to reject everything. It stems from an understanding that everything you do comes down to why. Why do you do everything? And understanding why is the reason you have to reject things before you get into why you do stuff. Some people just live their lives on autopilot and don't think about much. And when someone says something they think they like, it happens. They follow that belief. They understand that belief. But it's a failure on their part because they don't always think through what they espouse they believe. And I can make fun of Trump and Trump supporters forever, and I'm not going to do it because it didn't start with Trump. It's been going on for thousands of years. And so saying, well, it's a problem with Trump supporters, it's not. All people and there are hundreds of people and hundreds of millions of people in all walks of life that do the same thing. Some of them just happen to agree with you. And to get to my point is how I got to the understanding that you have to reject everything was piecemeal. When I was young, my family was ridiculously dysfunctional. And so I had to figure out a lot of stuff on my own. And so I started reading. I read a lot. How I came to my philosophical beliefs, I didn't read anything about that. I just figured it out. I said, well, if this is what people I know believe, why do they believe it? And it got into there was a lot of circular conversation with myself, because I didn't feel I could trust anyone. So the conversations were me and me alone. And so I would work with a line of reasoning that I had latched onto most of the time and said, why? Why? It doesn't matter what you believe if you know why. If you can come to an opinion where you understand why you believe something, and it's absolute with you. And I know we live in a world where we shouldn't believe in absolutes or anything like that, but foundationally, your beliefs have to be absolute. That doesn't mean they have to be hateful or loving or any of that. It just means you have to know that what you believe is not going to change in order for you to function without any without any limitations. And as I said, I know absolute thinking isn't the best thing, but if your foundational beliefs aren't solid, aren't real, if you don't know something about why you're saying something or doing something, you're not going to succeed at pretty much anything. And so when it comes to my beliefs, they are absolute. It doesn't mean that my beliefs can't be changed with better information, because that is where our political parties and extremists fail. They don't take into account anything but what they believe. And that's a failure also. But if you have solid foundational beliefs and you allow yourself to adapt those beliefs, as long as it's a logical reason to adapt them, or a very good foundational reason to adapt them, you will never attain peace with yourself or with the world. I mean, I still haven't, my beliefs are absolute, but I reject everything. And I don't mean it in a negative sense. Everything can be better. 100%. There is nothing in my life or yours or anyone else's that can't be better. That doesn't mean you should strive to make everything better, because happiness in life is about what you're willing to accept. And the things I went through when I was younger kind of forced me not to accept what I have. And there are some mitigating circumstances where I'm sort of required to accept what I have. But when it comes to that, I don't, I don't accept where I'm at. I'm always trying to get better, trying to be a better person. And without that, I would be dead. If I had followed the path of a lot of my family members, I would be dead. Or I would be in a situation where I'm living my dad's life, where he was just absolutely abusive, stoned and drunk out of his mind, and had nothing. Or he had something because he made a mistake and was rewarded for it. And I couldn't live like that. I've been sober most of my life. It doesn't mean I can't drink or do drugs. When I went through that phase in my life, I realized that it would take an amount that would probably kill me for me to enjoy any of it. So I said, well, I can't do that. So, and I moved on. It's cost me relationships. That's cost me, but being blatantly honest, if you are seeking out relationships like that, you're not really living. You're just kind of floating along and hoping something good will happen instead of actually making something happen. I do want to take a minute to say that the fires in the Bay Area are ridiculous. I didn't do a stream for a couple weeks because the smoke smell was so bad here where I'm at that I had trouble breathing. And once they actually evacuated the hotel because they thought something was on fire because the wood smoke was so bad in the hotel. But that's kind of a intermission for what's next. So I'd like to talk about how I got to where I am before that little aside. And when I was young, I did a lot. As I said, I did a lot of reading. I don't remember a lot of my childhood because I've either repressed it or because I have. It's believed I have autism. I smashed my head in any low hanging edifice I could. And so my memories from my early life are pretty bad. I remember the more specific stuff, but I do remember prior to hitting puberty at age 11, my mental growth was really bad. I wasn't as smart, or I didn't understand how to leverage how smart I was. When it came to understanding stuff. When I hit puberty, it all kind of clicked. Probably because my body started producing hormones that I didn't have. But as I said earlier on, my home life was terrible. So I wound up spending a lot of my time alone, a lot of my time having conversations with myself about why things were the way they were. Before I hit my 20s, I blamed a lot of the stuff that had happened to me on myself. And at some point, I realized that wasn't the case, but it took me a long time to get past that. But I realized in my teens that regardless of what I thought or where I was, in the greater scheme of things, in the world, what I did didn't matter as much as I believed I did. It did. And it brought me to a spot. It still persists to this day, but it brought me to a spot where what I thought became less important than where I was. And to kind of get into that, it's like, well, pardon me, if I believe X doesn't matter as much if it doesn't jive with reality. And so I started to stop thinking in my own perspective, stop thinking in generalizations as much as possible. Still do that. Everyone does it. Not much to be done with it except correct it. But I stopped thinking in generalizations and I started kind of sculpting what I believed based on the thought process around other options. And so I got from why me to why this. And that's an important step. But it wasn't, again, it's not fully formed. Again, it's still not, to this day, I sometimes still struggle with why me? But the reality is that the reason why things happen to people is the decisions they make. You get there by saying, okay, I need to do this. And so you do it. But most people fail to realize all of the consequences of what they do. And so they even forget about what they've done a lot of times when bad stuff happens. And they continue on, and then that decision they made X amount of days or months or years ago comes back to bite them. Like, I have the eviction from Tenderloin Housing Clinic. I don't know how that's going to affect my housing, but I think it's negatively affected it up to this point. And while there's a new program, sorry for the change in light, while there's a new program that will probably get me into a real apartment for 30% of my income, I'm still probably going to have to reconcile with Tenderloin Housing Clinic at some point possibly in order to get that. I haven't had the paperwork I've needed to go work with the home key program, so I don't know 100% where it's going to go, but I recently got the documentation I needed, and so I'm going this week to take care of it. But it's and when you break down your understanding for why things happen to, well, what choices did people make for it to get here? And when you get to that, you go, well, maybe it was supposed to happen. That I'm not saying that terrible things should happen to people because they make poor choices, but oftentimes they do. If you drink and drive, we'll take that example. If you drink and drive, there's a chance your judgment is going to be impaired. There's a chance you're going to hit a parked car or hit a driving car because you pass out or you're not paying attention because someone's trying to text you while you're drunk. And, the poor decision was deciding to drive drunk, and it's further exacerbated by other circumstances that force you to make other poor decisions. And so you get there. That's where you get. I mean, if you decided to drive drunk and you hit someone and killed someone, even if you're hospitalized or whatever, or not hospitalized, and you get through it without any damage whatsoever, you killed someone or you crippled someone or whatever. And you have to live with that decision because it was your decision because you decided to drive drunk instead of taking a cab home or getting someone to give you a ride home in your car or whatever. And I use this example because I referred to that my dad got lucky, even though he was pretty much broke his entire life. And he had gone to he had a bar he regularly frequented, and he drank every day for as long as I could remember. And when I was really young, he left the bar he frequented. He was driving to his apartment somewhere in suburban St. Louis, ran a red light, and was T-boned by someone not paying attention. In the accident, he broke his face because he refused to wear a seatbelt, and his face hit the crossbar of his convertible. His larynx was crushed because when he flew forward from Uh, the driver's seat, his throat hit a steering wheel. And amazingly, he lived. He had to get an emergency tracheotomy. And he convalesced for over a year. But it didn't deter him from what he did. It didn't deter him from living a life without, I mean, he never worked. His girlfriend of multiple years put up with it. She worked a lot and he never worked. And I mean, we lived on food stamps and cash. And for a few months when I was 7 or 8, they got Social Security in my name. And while I never really got to know my dad, the things I know about him just made me kind of recoil. So I chose not to do what he did. And so I never smoked. I never drank. I mean, and I can't say I never drank. I did drink, but it never got to the point where it was a necessity for me. You know, I was an opportunist when I was young. I drank when it was free. And so that was that. But part of why I'm where I'm at is, even though I've had the motivation to do stuff pretty much my entire life, I realized that not a lot I was doing mattered much, and it affected me a lot more when I was younger than it does now. Now I understand that while basically everything I do is, while it's not irrelevant, it's not as important as I think it is. I understand that what I do now is important, even if it's not important to someone else. And it took me 20 years to really grasp that. 20 years of kind of floating along with or without a job, or traveling from city to city. And a lot of that stemmed from not being able to take the time to think about where I was, and just being forced to live in the moment. And when you get to that understanding, you think, well, maybe you wasted your life, Brian. But the reality is I didn't. I lived my life as best I could with the choices I made for my life. And while there are things I would change if I could, knowing I can't go back in time, I know I can't change those things. And so I don't worry about it. I just try to live my life as best I can now, so that we get to where, or I get to where I want to be. And I'm sharing this with you because it's important to understand that while most of someone's life can be a failure, it can be productive and healthy. And it is what it is. I came to my decisions about why I did what I did when I was young. I didn't evaluate them as I got older. I just kind of lived in the moment, trying to get to a future that wasn't for me. And here I am, talking to the internet and my lone stalker. Oh, sorry. And so, enough rambling. So the first part was understanding that in the greater scheme of things, what you believe individually is important, but it isn't to the exclusion of what everyone else believes. Now, I'm not a huge believer in groupthink. I believe everyone should take the time to understand and believe what they do through careful consideration and conversations with not necessarily other people, but conversations with someone, even if it's just yourself, presenting an alternate point of view, to get where you need to be. And we'll be a better society if we all get to that point. But as long as there's groupthink, as long as someone says, oh, this is a good idea, and people follow them, then we won't. I mean, I did a video a couple months ago about the whole George Floyd thing, and the guy in Wisconsin, Jacob White, I think his last name is. I can't remember his last name, but the guy gets shot 7 times trying to get to his car with his kids in them, and he's paralyzed from the waist down now. I mean, is it ever going to stop? Is there ever going to be enough change in our society to where this doesn't happen anymore? I mean, I've made it very clear. I don't believe in defunding the police, and I don't believe in defunding the police for this reason. There are always going to be people that kill other people. There are always going to be people that rob other people. There are always going to be people that assault physically or sexually, mentally, whatever, other people. And there need to be people who enforce laws that are common sense. Like, you can't murder someone. You can't rob someone. You can't rape someone. You can't beat someone up just because you don't like them. There have to be laws, and there have to be people who enforce those laws. But what we don't need are all these extraneous laws that keep police in business. I'll be blatantly honest. I believe all drugs and alcohol should be legalized and regulated. I believe police shouldn't be able to illegally it's illegally, but legally seize someone's belongings for violating drug laws. I believe that we need to reduce the number of laws that affect people negatively, that can cause people to be targeted, so that there aren't situations like this. Now, I know that, and I also know there are 2 sides to every story. And well, there are some times when police escalation is advised, like when someone they're trying to apprehend is armed, then sure, if they feel there's a danger to someone else or their own life is in danger, then violence can be justified. But if they aren't in danger, if someone else isn't in danger, they should never be able to pull out their weapons. They should never be able to discharge their weapons and keep their job, period. And, it's so ridiculous that we're not, there's nothing being done. And I've stated this before, and it's part of my beliefs. If you accept what someone else gives you regarding your life, regarding your freedom, regarding anything that is uniquely yours. You're perpetually indebted to them. It's not. It's a form of slavery, because if you say, "Well, you can tell me what to do here," whether it's your home or whether it's anywhere private, then you basically have no freedom. And I'll be very clear about that. You cannot do something that isn't harming someone else without repercussion, then you're in a form of slavery, because you don't have the ability to make informed and understood decisions on what it is you're trying to do. And a lot of the laws on the books, federal, local, state, prevent you from doing things that on your own that don't harm anyone else, and make an informed decision on it. Now, and that's, and as long as we overlook this real problem, we're never going to have, we're not going to get anywhere. We haven't gotten anywhere for 30 years since I've been paying attention to politics. And if you look in the history of the United States, if you look at the history of the civil rights movement, if you look at the history of slavery and the entirety of history, all we do is deny things to people who aren't like us, or and I say us because I'm a white man. And so if you don't look like me, people who look like me have decided you can't have what we have because you're not like me. And that by itself is an inherent racism and bigotry of its own. And that's kind of what I've been saying. You can, I had a friend, and I don't talk to him much anymore. But basically, he was all excited because the George Floyd protest lasted 6 weeks, and there was graffiti everywhere, and people were avoiding tear gas and other BS. And I was like, well, what about actual change to where this doesn't happen again? And he's like, oh, well, but they've done this and this and this. And baby steps was his final saying on it. I was like, well, that's dumb. If you're not going, if the fundamental way things are isn't changed, if the fundamental things we have come to accept aren't changed, nothing is going to be different. You're going to see a shooting somewhere in the country because no one wants to change anything. And so we as a people have to make a decision about what we want. It's not simply about Black Lives Matter. It's not simply about police violence towards people of color. But if you don't, if people don't understand that this is what has to change, no one's ever going to, it's never going to get changed. It's never going to be any different because we won't make it different. We have, with our freedom, we have the power to be our own people. And we don't take it. We elect someone to say, oh, okay, well, this is what we need, blah, blah, blah. And oh, there was a killing of a kid. And so we're going to make a law out of it 6 months later when it doesn't matter because it was a one-off thing. We don't need reactive government. We need a proactive government that actually does stuff before shit happens. And we don't have that. And we don't have it because we want the people we elect to be popular. We should not care about that. We should care whether people are going to govern well. We should care that our government will be on top of something like coronavirus. It took us 3 months to actually do anything about coronavirus. They didn't even have a reliable test until the end of March. And it's been proven that there were swaths of cases across the country in January and February and early March. And yet, through the testing protocol, we'll use air quotes here, through the testing protocol, there were 400 to 500 cases diagnosed at the end of March when thousands of people had already had it. And all we've gotten since then is excuses. And that's, I mean, and it's like that throughout the government. It doesn't matter whether it's taxation, it doesn't matter whether it does, none of it matters. It's all the same. It's all unacceptable BS. And that, I mean, I'm just the grumpy old man who says, well, blah, 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 get off my porch, blah, blah, blah. I mean, but the reality is that we cannot change if we don't accept change. And most people don't want to change. I mean, I'm sure any of you watching this has had to work from home or has lost their job because of the pandemic. And we didn't have a plan in place for it. So that pain is going to be permanent. Because the economy has to fix itself so that people working from home will have more restaurants to go to or order from, because they live, instead of living in, say, San Francisco, they live in Santa Cruz and work from there. And we aren't ready for it. I mean, there's still 10 million people. There's still 10 million people unemployed. And I saw a map on CNN the other day where they were talking about how 2/3 of the states are already back to normal because of coronavirus, but that's not the case. I mean, I'll give San Francisco as an example. Saturday, which was 3 days ago, San Francisco started up its underground rail system again. Today, they had to yesterday, they had to make the decision to close it down again because someone who works in the main train yard got coronavirus and they don't know who else got infected. And there was an issue with some of the wires, that switching wires that were not up to spec, and they have to replace those now too. So that's the excuse they're using for shutting it down. But someone in their rail yard got sick with coronavirus, and because they don't know who else may have been in contact with them, they have to shut down the entire operation so that they can figure it out. And what really has changed? I mean, nothing has changed. All right, I'm done ranting. Just, it's, I mean, it's the same thing every freaking video. I get onto a subject that I don't want to get onto because I'm just going to preach and rant and all this other bullshit. And I do it for 10 or 15 minutes, even though the crux of the video is something else. But that's the format now. So 45-minute videos are the norm. Yeah, sorry for the teeth. Anyway, I hope you all have a good night. I hope you all are staying safe, staying home if needed. And I hope that things get better for you if they're shitty for you. Have a wonderful night. I will be back on Thursday. Hopefully the smoke isn't so bad that I have to take another week off because I can't talk the next day. Thank you for watching. Like the video if you're watching it. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't, and have a great night.